Welcome to our look back at some great recent NBR interviews in NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan, and coming up, the slow-burning success of E-Road, AI moving into the tourism market, backing to help develop a new kind of targeted cancer drug, and there's more. First up, a new report starkly reveals the gender bias at play in New Zealand's investment scene and highlights seldom acknowledged pressures on women entrepreneurs from gendered role expectations at home. Comments by women in the study included, "The worst comment that I got from a high-profile angel investor was that I should tell people I'm single because I'd probably raise more capital." Study author Janine Swale from the University of Auckland Business School also hopes the women's stories will inform and inspire other women to pursue new ventures. Janine Swale joined the NBR's Nicola Shepherd.
The first part of the report, as you said, Nikki, really kind of looks at what is it that women want from an investor, aside from just the finance and the investment. What other aspects are they looking for when they are developing these relationships with their investor community? And one of the top things that came out was this idea of company fit. And company fit in itself is not overly surprising, but what I did find with these women, for example, they would turn down investment if they genuinely didn't think that their team of investors or their investor syndicate was the right fit for their businesses. And what we mean by fit is values alignment, an understanding of their product and customer base, and also the goals and the impact that they wanted for their business. So this had to be bundled up into almost like a matching kind of relationship fit, where some of the women would refer to their investor team as a partner to actually help them reach those goals they had for their business. So that was one of the key things that was really important with regards to what women want. Mm-hmm. The other thing that came across that was not surprising, but I suppose corresponded to what wider research would say, they really felt they needed to develop their strategic network in this space of investment. So they were starting out very, very much from a blank slate often, and they were actually building those networks as well as raising finance, because they didn't necessarily know who to speak to, where to go, how to really start that raising capital journey. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's what they expected. What did they encounter? What did they experience when they're in the room pitching?
Yeah, so I suppose what we should say in terms of what they experienced, this study did want to focus in on their experiences of gender bias, be that unconscious or conscious. So the study did ask the participants, if they had had any experiences, and if so, what were those? But more importantly, how that impacted on their ability to raise finance and their journey. So what we did find was there were, by and large, unconscious bias was paramount, okay, more so than direct bias. There was some examples of direct conscious bias, but I would actually say that overall what the women were speaking to me about was the more subtle and more unconscious experiences, the microaggressions that they had to deal with. And that was important to bring out in the study, because what these women themselves would say is, we talk about this amongst ourselves, but we don't necessarily call it out because we recognise the dangers of doing that in terms of their position as an entrepreneur trying to grow their businesses and get their businesses off the ground. So they really shared those insights.
Can you give us some examples of some of the little kind of microaggressions or the kind of leaking out of unconscious bias?
I'll give you two examples. We have what I suppose the readers of the report will expect to hear. The questions that the women entrepreneurs received that they didn't think a male entrepreneur would get asked, So, for example, there was a young woman who was in her late 20s, early 30s. She had an investor who was genuinely interested in investing in the business. She thought she was making headway, and then one of the questions that didn't come directly in the pitch, but it came on a more sort of lower key, kind of more social interaction was, you know, I see that you're wearing a wedding ring. Do you have any children? No, I don't. Oh, when do you plan to have children? Okay. And she actually did answer the question honestly. She said, you know, we don't plan to, but I would hope that when we do, this wouldn't be an issue. But the thing is that could be an issue for investors, and we all come from a different values system where some of us think that that is an entirely legitimate question to ask and others will think not. So we as a community have to really address this and figure out, you know, what is acceptable and what's not acceptable in this space. So that's the very, I suppose, the expected example of bias in the sample. We have other examples where investors genuinely didn't realise that their comments were either inappropriate or misleading or whatever. But what we also need to factor is that the women the entrepreneurs themselves have unconscious bias too. So, for example, one of the women really questioned the validity of advice she had received from a woman mentor who was advising her on the valuation around her business, and she thought that she should cross-check that with a male angel investor because they surely would know the numbers more, or they'd be able to crunch the numbers better. So again, this report is not designed to be divisive. It's not designed to say, you know, you guys are awful and, you know, us women are so hard done by. It's about just highlighting that unconscious bias is out there, and we all should recognise that it is if we don't already, and start to address it.
Janine Swale, the author of a new report revealing gender bias in New Zealand's investment scene. She was speaking with Nicholas Shepherd. This is NBR Interviews, featuring great interviews popular with NBR subscribers. Now, the slow burn success of tech company eRoad. 2 decades on, the fleet management business, launched in the year 2000, has passed a significant milestone. To discuss this, NBR co-editor Tim Hunter joined Fiona Rotherham.
This is one of the things that interested me about that $500 million valuation, because I've certainly been aware of eRoad for quite a while. I've been following it for quite a while in the background. The company's origins go back quite a long way. It was founded in the year 2000 by an economist called Brian Mickey. And its core idea was to develop technology for the trucking market so that they could handle the road user charges administration more easily. It was to do with vehicle tracking and so on, automatic payment of RUC. That's a particular advantage in New Zealand. And they developed patented technology. And it was an excellent idea, actually. And obviously, the technology has developed quite a long way since 2000. But by the time that they floated in 2014, they were effectively the market leader in New Zealand, with a very strong position and very good customer backing. So. It's taken a long time to get to this point when you consider it's been more than 20 years since the company was founded and 7 years since the IPO. One of the interesting things about that is that the company floated at an IPO price of $3, which was the bottom of the indicative range at the time, $3 to $3.80. So tells you that the investor appetite was not all that massive at the time. But it's really taken until really last year before the share price started to actually justify the early investors' faith, if you like.
So from my dim recollections, when it floated, there were a number of tech companies floating at that time, but also it did miss some of its early prospectus forecasts, which the market doesn't like, does it? Well,
that's right. It was forecasting some pretty healthy growth, particularly on the revenue line. It didn't quite make that. The revenue growth was significant, but it didn't quite hit prospectus targets, and it significantly didn't hit the profit targets that it had forecast in the prospectus, missing it by quite a long way, in fact making a loss in the 2016 year. And in the end, it's taken, I think it was until 2020 before they made a bottom line profit. Now, obviously, with a growth company, they've been investing a lot in their technology, investing a lot in developing the market that they're going to serve, and so on. So that's often the way these tech companies go. But certainly, the market did not appreciate that level of miss on the prospectus target, and hence the share price doldrums, for such a long time post IPO, which is never a good look for an investment company. And you wonder whether really that early experience has kind of turned off a lot of investors for a long time, and perhaps they're now looking at it again, going, well, actually, this is actually a really good outfit now.
And the CEO, Steve Newman's hung in there too, hasn't he?
Well, that's right. He's been there since 2007, which is a very long stint for a chief executive, and particularly at a tech company. He's got a lot of skin in the game, so can really understand him hanging in there. His stake in the company is actually paid off big time for him. It's now worth of the order of $80 million. So he's done pretty well out of it. And indeed, deservedly so, you'd have to say. This is a company that's taken a while to get there, but it's starting to really show that it's repaying some trust.
So what do you think's driving that share price rise now, though?
Well, analysts are following it. It's also now listed on the ASX, and it's now got 4 analysts covering it.
Which always helps, doesn't it?
2 in Australia, 2 here. You've got that broader investment pool that are now paying attention to it. So that's partly it, I would think. But there's also been a sign that it's come through COVID really well. It's forecasting growth in the US, which is still a relatively small market compared to New Zealand for it, but obviously a much bigger opportunity. It's gained a new customer in Australia, which is going to repay that investment probably next year. And so there are signs that the growth trajectory is only going to get better from here. In saying that, it's not a super high growth trajectory based on past form, so it's not probably going to grow the way Xero might have done, for example. And there's also a sign that it's talking about acquisitions. Now, it's talked about acquisitions for quite a while, and it has done before. This could be another step change for it to grow into to another level, either by taking over a competitor or taking over new technology, another growth opportunity. So, having said that, in terms of the share price, that's harder to say how much further that can go, because certainly from one analyst I've been speaking to, it's blown past his expectations quite quickly, and it's now above his last 12-month target, which wasn't issued that long ago. So the extent to which investors should get excited about buying at these price levels is another matter indeed.
NBR co-editor Tim Hunter there speaking to Fiona Rotherham. This is NBR Interviews, compiled highlights of recent NBR video interviews. Ambit AI, the New Zealand-based conversational AI company, is making moves into the tourism market, hoping it will get back to full swing in the coming year. It's also started a new capital raising round with a focus on local investors and hoping to raise $4 million. The company was founded in 2016, and CEO Tim Warren joined the NBR's Hayden Green.
There's a few New Zealand companies that are doing AI, like Unique and Soul Machines and stuff. Do you work alongside them, or are they your direct competition?
We absolutely work alongside them. So we specifically work with Unique, with Noel Leeming, and we've got a very interesting digital human that's in store there, and you can have a conversation. So everything you see is provided by Unique, and all the conversation, both understanding what the customer says and also what is being spoken back, is driven by our platform. So we work very closely together, and Soul Machines as well. We equally have an integration into both of those companies.
Why is this area taken off worldwide at the moment? Why is everyone wanting these AI systems?
I think this is, if we roll back a bit, this is an area that's been talked about for quite some time. It's almost the nirvana, which is being able to talk to a computer that can solve your needs and your issues. And people are fantastic at dealing with high value, high complexity issues, but they're not that good at dealing with volume. And so when humans and AI can work together, you can deliver optimal outcomes. And I'll talk through this in terms of what happened before 2020 and what's happened during that time and post-COVID. So before 2020, everyone knew that there was this cool new technology available that could let computers talk to humans and give a pretty good experience. And overall, a reasonable experience was delivered, but people weren't always looking for the high-value use cases. They were looking for fun, entertainment, and innovation. In 2020, all of those people that were in call centres spread around the world, well, they were meant to be in call centres, but a lot of the time they were stuck at home. And the things that kept working were the systems, the automated, the self-help, and particularly the AI systems that were able to stay up and running without needing people to be in a call centre or even needing any people involved in the loop at all. So what happened last year is all of a sudden, instead of having discussions with companies where they were saying, oh yes, we've got a 5-year conversational plan around supporting customer service, that became a 5-month plan. And people were, instead of kind of kicking the can down the road and trying some experiments, they were getting real. They needed to not only deliver high-value results, but they needed to deliver it very quickly. And companies that were able to deliver that in a very high-speed turnaround, they are the ones that benefited. So we are fundamentally seeing a different response from the market this year compared to 18 months ago. And people are actively contacting us saying, we need this. Not, hey, this would be a cool thing to show our board, or wouldn't this be nice to show to people in store, but you can deliver value and we need that because we can't get people on the ground to do it.
Ambit AI CEO Tim Warren speaking to the NBR's Hayden Green. This is NBR Interviews our readers have been watching at nbr.co.nz. Otago University spin-out Amarok is the first deal under Deep Tech Incubator. The new spin-out has secured $14 million in backing to help develop a new kind of targeted cancer drug in the emerging field of RNA therapy. Joining the NBR's Nicola Shepherd was the leader of the Amarok Therapeutics team, Chief Scientific Officer and founder, Dr. Sarah Diermeyer.
So we are hoping that the new cancer drugs that we are developing will provide substantial survival benefit for cancer patients and also contribute to better patient well-being, so making the whole treatment a bit more bearable, less side effects than our current treatments.
And what's the role of RNA in that?
So of course, there have been many, many decades of cancer research and research into new cancer drugs. So our approach is different from what other companies have tried in the past because we focus on a new class of molecules in the cell. And these molecules are called long non-coding RNAs or lincRNAs. We also refer to them as the dark matter of the cell, of the genome. And that's because we don't have all that much information about these molecules just yet. We know that there is tens of thousands of them in the cell, in the human genome, but we don't have a good understanding just yet what they do, and they have not been explored in detail in the context of cancer research just yet.
Where are you up to now, and what are the next steps along the pathway to actually producing a drug?
So we have identified a number of these non-coding RNAs as new therapeutic targets in cancer, and we've started preclinical development. That means we are designing entirely new drugs that will work on these targets and stop cancer growth. And we have done a number of lab experiments and animal models, patient-derived organoids. The next steps, and this is really where Amarok as a company comes in, is the clinical development. So bringing our academic research, our new findings into the clinic closer to the patient.
So what does this funding mean to you?
It is probably the fulfillment of a lifelong dream for me personally. My journey on cancer research and trying to develop new cancer drugs has started about 20 years ago, really, when I was a teenager and had cases of cancer in my immediate family, which I then noticed how terrible this is really for the patient, but also the experience for the family. And that's where this drive inside of me started, that I wanted to develop new drugs, make it better for the patient, and of course also actually help the patient and improve patient survival. And then I started my education as a scientist, and here we are 20 years later, amazingly, we actually do have this opportunity now. So I am beyond thrilled at this opportunity, really.
Armorock Therapeutics Chief Scientific Officer and Founder Dr. Sarah Diermeyer speaking to the NBR's Nicholas Shepherd. You're watching NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan. Israel Whitley is the founder of Auckland-based labour hire firm ALH. They had to do some rapid-fire pivoting when COVID-19 struck last year. However, the firm has emerged in better shape than he could have imagined and opened 2 new branches with more on the horizon. Izzy Whitley joined the NBR's Maria Slade.
You started out in construction. That was your sort of main thing. How is that sector going for you?
I was always pretty pro getting out of construction as soon as we could. It's a bit of a scrappy game at times, but bearing in mind we've got some great clients in there, some of our real high volume contracts do come in there, but it's definitely not a market that we target and set out to go and achieve in. If anything, we kind of like to bring on organic work through construction. If anything, we don't hunt it, but no, it's still going strong. We're not seeing any downturn or slowdown in it from our side of the fence.
But you have pivoted to quite a lot of other areas, haven't you? I mean, you were doing a lot of the essential workers and PPE and everything this time last year, but you were also getting into things like tech. So what kinds of fields are you big in at the moment?
Still in those. Anything we can, really. Tech's one that's growing. There's a lot of tech needs developing, that needs hands on the ground to kind of work towards what they're trying to achieve in factories and warehousing. We're involved in some forestry, some planting and picking at the moment, which we'd never been in prior to this. And in the regions, all the areas, what we were kind of in before. So just kind of focusing and seeing what else is on the healthcare stuff. Still booming a bit. That's definitely slowed down, but once that slowed down, we kind of picked up a couple of things. Also in the warehousing and logistics kind of side of the business and areas.
So everyone's crying out for workers at the moment. Just describe the scene. Sort of how hard is it to find staff at the moment?
There's a massive labour shortage. Well, in my kind of short time in my seat, it's definitely the worst it's been. And it's tricky. We've never to date had someone working for ALH on site on a working visa. So we predominantly try and only employ Kiwis to give them further opportunities. So it's almost like I think the candidates or the on-site team or operators have their choice now, where it was kind of a bit more of the other way around. So that they can be more selective, which in turn actually slows down what we can deliver in the market. But for us, it's just making sure we're driving that culture that we set out to from the very start, and that kind of attracts people far more than what we actually realise. So it's just continuing to keep doing that.
Where are the biggest holes?
Unskilled, by a long shot. Unskilled labour is in high demand at the moment, and the supply is just probably at like 60% deliveries. If we had 100 people walk into our office wanting work, we'd place it the next day.
What's your view on the government's immigration policies and future plans for immigration? Yeah,
I try not to look into that too much. I kind of let politics definitely isn't something that I'm too involved in. Look, and whether people have got opinions on it, realistically, I'm not going to change it, right? So I kind of just try and play the cards that I've been dealt and go from there.
It's got to be good business for you, though. What kind of turnover are you doing these days?
Well, last year we came in above 6 mil, and we were setting out to kind of do 12, but I'm confident, and I'd be pretty frustrated if we did less than 18. So we've been really aggressive. The 2 new branches have been fantastic. We've got some really good talent in the office, and I think the ambition and the competitiveness within our office culture is really thriving at the moment, and in turn so is the business. So that's kind of what we want to do this year, but the goal's to kind of supersede the 1,000 on-site staff that we wanted, and we think this can be a 50 million in revenue business in the next kind of 3 to 4 years. So
the founder of Auckland-based labour hire firm ALH, Izzy Whitley, speaking to the NBR's Maria Slade. You're watching NBR Interviews, compiled highlights of recent NBR video interviews. Now the book review by Neville Gibson. The book is Brecht, Wheel, 3 Women, and Germany on the Brink by Pamela Katz. Neville joined me in the NBR studio.
Brecht was probably the leading playwright of the 20th century, but he was quite famous because he was a communist. He was driven out of Nazi Germany like a lot of other artists. He ended up in Hollywood, didn't do very well there, mainly because he didn't learn to speak or write English, but he did do a lot of his best plays during that period in exile, not just in America, but also in Scandinavia. So he was actually left Nazi Germany in 1933 when he and Weil had written the Threepenny Opera, and basically the opera was shut down, all their books were burned, and they had no source of income.
And quite a trip from Germany to, I think, California is where he landed in the US.
Well, he spent 6 years in the United States, ending up in Hollywood and then returning to East Berlin in 1947, right at the time, just after the war, when the whole of Berlin was basically destroyed and was occupied by the Russians. But before that, they'd spent between 1933 and 1937, 38, he was in Scandinavia and met some pretty interesting people there. So yeah, they did spend he and his coterie, because he had a wife, Helen Weigel, plus there were various collaborators, all of them female, who helped him write the scripts and that sort of thing. And also Weil had a similar type of journey, but wasn't with Brecht at that time.
So flesh out what I read from the cover there, because that really sounds quite a story with many dimensions.
Well, there's lots of biographies of Brecht. This is by Pamela Katz, and she's a screenwriter. She wrote Hannah Arendt, very good film on the Nuremberg trials and the kind of dilemmas that many people faced, and whether you collaborated with the Nazis, that kind of thing, and living in dictatorships. And this one is really about also the collaboration he had, and Weil as well, with their wives, Lotte Lenya was Weil's wife, and she was the leading singer, and Helen Weigel was Brecht's official third wife. But there was also the so-called mistresses who actually did a lot of the, what you might call the grunt work, writing and translating and polishing up the plays, doing the research. He wrote about a dozen plays in the period before he got to America, and very productive, and that's what his reputation still rests on, these plays that he wrote in that time.
I mentioned the Galileo production that's recently been gone here. Is that the area that he wrote in?
That was his first big epic play. He and Weil had done the Threepenny Opera and a few musical-type dramas, not high opera, but what you called low opera. The operas weren't low, it's just they were for ordinary people. That was their target. They were politically driven, these people. They're all left-wingers or communists, that sort of thing. But Galileo was the start of a whole range of what you might call, he called them epic plays. They're very didactic, lots of speeches. They're good reads, actually, probably quite hard to watch, though, because he believed in alienating the audience. So you weren't to empathise with the characters, and so actors were told to sort of play down that side of it.
It's an interesting approach. Can you tell us more about?
Well, it wasn't a popular approach with the critics or even the audiences. Audiences didn't flock to these plays. They loved the Threepenny Opera, which wasn't sort of, Brecht didn't really control that. But when he got to East Berlin, they got all their actors together and they formed the Berliner Ensemble, and the Moscow provided them with a lot of money. So they were the main attraction in East Berlin for quite a long time during the 40s and 50s. And if you went to East Berlin at night time, there's very few lights on in the streets and so on as they were rebuilding. But the theatre was well lit and well attended, especially by people from West Germany as well, because the wall wasn't built till later in the 60s.
Now, he returned, as we've been speaking, to East Germany. He was, hounded out of Hollywood during McCarthy?
Yeah, he was well known. He didn't hide the fact that he was a Marxist in Hollywood, and the Joe McCarthy set up these Un-American Activities Committee in Hollywood. Brecht made one appearance, lied to him, said he wasn't a communist, but he left basically the next day and got out of America as quickly as he could.
So what sort of read is it, the partnership?
The book is fascinating if you're at all interested in the history of the dramas he wrote, as well as Weil's music. Weil ended up writing on Broadway and basically lost his political type of instincts. Brecht, on the other hand, became even more of a hardened communist with the Berliner Ensemble. And it's all about how he also related, and the amount of Pamela Katz, of course, is interested in the contribution of the females in this setup, both as actresses, singers, and writers.
Were they there by choice, or were they used?
Oh, no. Brecht had this charismatic appeal to a lot of people. I mean, he was considered probably the leading dramatist of the time. And, of course, famous people do attract other people who want to advance their careers. And, of course, if you're a bright woman, it was very hard to break into what was essentially a male-dominated industry, the performing arts.
You've got another book with you. Can you hold that one up?
This is actually the script of Life of Galileo. Now, there are various versions of this. This is the translation by Desmond Anstey, and his one has been replaced by a number of others, but they're quite fascinating, these the way that the play, which was first written in 1938-39, and then again in the 40s, he redid it with Charles Lawton, who wrote an English script for it. Then when he got back to Berlin in the 50s, they rewrote it yet again, all to make it more relevant to the common day and the kind of issues we're still talking about today.
The full review of Pamela Katz's Brecht, Wheel, Three Women and Germany on the Brink is at nbr.co.nz right now. And join me again soon as we showcase the best NBR video interviews in NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks again for watching.